Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Yusuf Aram. From Gaza to the Gulf, tensions are surging once again. Last week in Cairo, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan met his Egyptian counterpart Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, a sign of how far relations between two former rivals have come. The leaders signed agreements spanning from defense, trade, health, and agriculture, and restated an ambitious goal of lifting bilateral trade to $15 billion a year. Gaza was also central to the talks. Erdogan and el-Sisi pledged to push for a sustainable political solution. The Rafah crossing is partially reopened, allowing limited movement of people and aid amid ongoing Israeli strikes. At the same time, tensions between Washington and Tehran continue to simmer.
I also discussed with His Excellency the President the sincere and honest efforts that Egypt and Turkey are exerting to reduce escalation in the region, advance diplomatic solutions, and avert the specter of war, whether regarding the Iranian nuclear file or concerning the region in general.
With regard to our neighbor Iran, we believe that external interventions pose significant risks to the entire region. Resolving issues with Iran, including the nuclear file, through diplomatic means is the most appropriate method.
The U.S. is bolstering its military footprint in the Gulf. Iran says it's open to diplomacy, but warns any attack could carry a heavy price. In a region drifting closer to confrontation, Turkey and Egypt now find themselves aligned, not just as partners, but as potential mediators. Both are calling for dialogue and have opposed any outside military intervention against Iran. But will those calls be heard? For more, joining me now from Cairo is Ramzi El-Zadin Ramzi. He's a former ambassador and previously served as the undersecretary at Egypt's foreign ministry. Sir, thanks for joining me again. A lot to discuss. A very important visit by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan to Cairo, meeting his Egyptian counterpart. Now, this is quite extraordinary. I mean, there has been a warming of relations, but it looks like this is a lot more than warming. This looks like both countries are ready for the next step. What's driving this convergence, at least from an Egyptian perspective?
Well, Yusuf, thank you very much for having me on your show once again. I agree with you. I think this is probably a watershed in Egyptian and Turkish relations. Much has changed since the normalization process started in 2023. What's driving this is a number of factors. I think developments in the region, which I think came to a forefront as a result of the Gaza war and its ramifications, but also changes that are taking place in the international system. I see middle powers like Turkey and Egypt gaining ascendancy, finding agency in their cooperation, and I think these are the two main factors that have brought Egypt and Turkey together.
Mm-hmm. What are the foreign policy portfolios that are most concerning to Egypt that they would want to work with the Turks on?
Well, I think a whole host of issues. I would enumerate only some, but of course there is the issue of Gaza and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I think that is critical because that is critical for the stability of the region. But also there is Libya, there is Sudan, there is Somalia, and certainly Syria. I mean, on all of these issues, I think there is quite a fair amount of common interests, and I think cooperation between the two countries will help resolve these issues. But primarily, I will go back again to the issue of Palestine. I think this is critical, and I think the role of Egypt and Turkey are complementary, including on Gaza, as I think you probably know.
Mm-hmm. Where do you see this relationship evolving? Now, we had the normalization. It looks like there's another step right now to be taken. But in about 3 to 5 years, do you see joint military exercises? Do you see a collective defense agreement? Do you see something that would really bind them together, maybe a maritime agreement, exclusive economic zones? Can the relationship take that step where they're truly allies?
Well, I think all the issues that you've enumerated have already taken So the issue is to develop them further. We have signed a military agreement that involves co-production of military hardware. There is cooperation across the board, economic and otherwise. I mean, if you look at it this way, I mean, the visit of President Erdogan to Egypt has implications not only for the bilateral relationship, which has been taken, I think, a number of steps forward, but also for the stability and peace in the region. So it is extremely important. Now, a few years down the road, yes, I mean, I can see Egypt and Turkey working closer together on regional issues and on bilateral issues, of course. But I think more importantly, I think what is absolutely clear, at least to me, is that there is complementarity in the economies, but also complementarity in the roles that can play to bring about peace and stability in the region. So yes, I am optimistic about the future of Turkish-Egyptian relations, and I think both countries have, I think maybe belatedly, it should have happened much earlier, have seen that cooperation amongst them is not only important for the bilateral relationship, but also for their role in the Middle East region.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there definitely seems to be this understanding in the region. Just to quote Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And it seems that the middle powers definitely want a seat at the table. Now, you talked about security being very, very important. About a couple of weeks ago, the media was abuzz with some type of trilateral collective defense agreement between the Turks, the Saudis, and the Pakistanis. Many people, including myself, called it what could be the framework for a Muslim NATO. Do you see any type of structure being formed in the near future that could be identified as a Muslim NATO? Is there that desire in Egypt, or do you feel there's that desire in other Muslim world capitals? And does the rest of the Muslim world want to see these leading middle powers create that type of formation?
Well, I mean, when you speak of NATO, you're talking about, an alliance, a political military alliance. Now, Egypt has traditionally avoided being part of any military alliance. And I think the situation will not change. Now, if you're talking about military arrangements that will secure peace and stability in the area, that will enhance the security of individual countries, yes, and I think there are creative ways of going about that. But a strict military alliance or a former military alliance, I think this is for the countries to decide. But I think we're not there yet. But I think we can pretty much work out arrangements that will cater to our individual and collective interests. And I would look forward to that happening. Mm-hmm. Now, you've mentioned the contacts between Islamabad, Ankara, and Riyadh. Egypt is not part of that as far as I can tell. But whether this will evolve and include other countries, it is possible, provided that the countries find a way to ensure that these arrangements will serve their interests. I am for stronger military ties with all countries, with the three countries that you have mentioned, and even beyond. And I think that will serve the interests of peace and stability in the Middle East. Mm-hmm.
The Turkish foreign minister, in a recent interview, I mean, it was very quick and in passing, but he talked about the possibility in the future, a structure very similar to the European Union, but out of Middle Eastern, North African countries, like a Muslim European Union, something way beyond what a OIC would be. Can you see something like that forming, maybe not military, but more political and economic?
Well, you see, I've always been advocating for an OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, like arrangement for the Middle East. But before we reach that point, I think what we need to do is to articulate a security vision for the Middle East, a regional security vision for the Middle East. And I think here, the role and cooperation of Turkey and the Arab countries is essential. And that, in my view, would be the first step towards the kind of arrangements you're talking about, which does have an economic and political and a military dimension to it. And I think that is certainly something that we should be aspire to and work towards. I think the Arabs have already started a process, and I think I would like to refer to the ministerial meeting that took place last September in Cairo, whereby Saudi Arabia and Egypt presented a draft resolution that was subsequently adopted about the principles upon which a regional security system would be based. And that certainly envisages a role for Turkey and other regional states. So I think that is a good starting point. But I think Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey can also work together to articulate such a vision together.
Mm-hmm. One last question. Presidents el-Sisi and Erdogan have both tried in a mediating capacity to find some type of peace between Iran and the United States, or let's say Israel as well, hiding behind the shadow of the United States. What can they do together, and what's their biggest fear regarding any type of kinetic engagement with Iran?
Well, let me just take a step back before I answer your question. I think one of the fundamental principles upon which Turkey and Egypt agree upon is the inviolability of borders, preservation of the unity of countries. And that relates to Syria, relates to Iran, relates to Sudan, Somalia, Libya. And I think this is critical. Now, if we talk about Iran, clearly Egypt and Turkey have been working together and also bilaterally to ensure that the situation in Iran does not get out of hand. We are trying to prevent any sort of military activity or attacks against Iran. That, in our view, certainly Egypt's view, will have, I think, highly destabilizing effects on the region. So this has to be avoided. And I think Turkey played a very important role, and so has Egypt. And I think they will continue to work together to ensure that Iran and the United States reach an agreement on issues that are of concern to both countries. And we will do our best in the coming days and weeks to ensure that the process that has started actually right now in Oman produces positive results. And I think what is absolutely important is we avoid any attack on Iran, because that would have very severe negative consequences for peace and stability in the region.
Definitely something the region wants to avoid. Ramzi El-Zadini, Ramzi, always an enlightening conversation. Thank you for taking the time to answer our questions. To continue the conversation, joining me now from Istanbul is Filiz Katman, an assistant professor of political science and international relations at Istanbul Aydın University. And from Madrid, Ricardo Fabiani, the interim program director for the Middle East and North Africa at the International Crisis Group. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining me. I mean, we just had a very good conversation about the Egyptian perspective of the big meeting between el-Sisi and President Erdogan. So I want to take a little look at the Turkish perspective, Filiz. Why is this important for Turkey? What can we expect from this, let's call it an upgraded relationship now that normalization is over?
If you look at the ongoing turmoil, especially in this region, this kind of relationship, deepening relationships, play a very major role for providing stability in the region. So we all know that Turkey and Egypt have some trouble periods, but right now they reach a kind of cooperation era that they both deepening the relations with each other, and also they try to extend the content of the relations, adding new sectors that exist as a kind of bilateral investment period for both Egypt and Turkey. And in this such a turmoil period, such attempts are very critical for bringing more stability to the region. And despite the conflicts that we have, some issues that Egypt and Turkey do not look eye to eye, despite that fact, this is very, very important that there are some kind of milestone events in the upcoming period for those conflicts as well.
Ricardo, the MENA region, no short on crises, and at the International Crisis Group, you're probably very, very busy. In the event, or assuming that the relations between Turkey and Egypt are upgraded and we're going to see more cooperation and coordination going forward, which files, or at least which regional crises, do you expect these two leaders to be able to cooperate on the most?
Well, what is fascinating about the reconciliation and the rapprochement between these two countries is that they have actually managed to identify a lot of areas of common shared interest between them. And these areas, of course, are related mostly to conflicts in the region. And these areas, these conflicts are mainly, of course, Gaza being the number one priority, I would say, for security for both countries and for most countries in the region. They seem to see eye to eye on the need to move on to the next phase in the implementation of the ceasefire and to basically accelerate also the entry of humanitarian aid and the reconstruction of Gaza. So there is, I would say, very strong convergence between these two countries, also on the need to move on with the international stabilization force in this area and the need to protect the unity of Gaza from potential encroachment by Israeli forces. Another conflict where the two countries seem to also converge quite significantly is Sudan. On Sudan, Turkey and Egypt are quite aligned in their backing for the Sudanese armed forces and in their support for a form of humanitarian truce that should lead to negotiations and the formation of a unity government based around the existing state institutions that both countries support, mainly, as I said, the Sudanese army.
Filiz, I want to ask you about another conflict, or at least frozen conflict, in the periphery of Egypt. That's Libya. Now, during the normalization process, it looked like the convergence between the Egyptians and the Turks kind of helped that normalization, especially the convergence on Libya. Recently, Gaddafi's son was assassinated, big event for Libya. How is that going to impact Turkey and Egypt in Libya? And do you see more cooperation between both of these countries on Libya?
So when we talk about Libya, we should definitely think about the countries who are not regional ones, but very have impact, a big impact on the affairs ongoing in Libya, especially when we think about the Russian Federation and United States of America. That's why the regional actors' cooperation, a kind of common initiative, creates stability in the regional country is very critical, because these countries primarily do not prefer the stability, a kind of that we can think about Libya. And that's why the assassination of the Gaddafi's son, that we can think about in that manner. And we should definitely think about Italy here, which is not in this picture right now, but when we think about Libya, Italy is another regional actor that we should take into consideration. I've been to Libya after the fall of Gaddafi, and I have seen lots of Turkish investments over there, and the instability in the region definitely creates a trouble. And when we think about Turkish-Libya relations, there's an initiative made by Turkish and Libyan governments that the territorial water issue that provided some extra miles to Libya and changed the game, the chess game played in Eastern Mediterranean Sea. So the common initiative that Turkey and Egypt this time, if they can manage a similar effort with regard to territorial waters, which will contribute to the Eastern Mediterranean conflict as well. So Libya is a very critical issue when we think about this Eastern Mediterranean oil and gas reserves, the oil and gas numbers, prices in the sector, and the non-regional actors playing a role. So regional actors cooperatively playing a role in Libya will definitely contribute both Turkish and Egyptian security as well.
Ricardo, one of the main themes of the bilateral or at least the main achievements, was the military framework agreement. Now, we also saw Erdogan and Riyadh the day before sign many agreements as well, a lot focusing on cooperation in the defense industry. Are regional countries, especially these regional middle powers, are they positioning for a post-American MENA region?
I mean, what is interesting here is that there is a certain eagerness by Egypt, and you mentioned also Saudi Arabia, to deepen their military relations with Turkey, right? And Turkey has positioned itself as a major military supplier, not just in the region, but I would say across the world, mainly thanks to its drone technology, which the country is industry masters, and it's a very prized, I would say, military piece of military equipment that many countries in the region want. And as I said before, it's fascinating to see how Egypt went from not wanting to have any relations with Turkey to now wanting to establish actually closer military cooperation, partly centered on this drone technology. So to answer your question, yes, there is, I would say, an attempt, a clear desire by regional powers, whether they're middle powers or even smaller countries, to diversify their ties.
Fidesz, when we look at some of the foreign policy portfolios that el-Sisi and Erdogan agree on, we see obviously Gaza, both sides wanting to keep Rafah crossing open for more humanitarian aid. One Somalia, not recognizing Somaliland, sharing concerns on Iran not wanting to see foreign military intervention. And the common denominator here seems to be Israeli foreign policy on these three issues. Could we say that this is kind of a snapback to the Abraham Accords that Israel was trying to coordinate in the region, and we're seeing now a reaction to that between Turkey and Egypt, Turkey and Saudi Arabia, maybe Pakistan joining?
Yes, when we think about the attempts of Israel to create a new status quo or in the region, Egypt plays a very major role aside from the Somaliland issue, because Suez Canal is the critical point with regard to the recent recognition attempt by Israel and United Arab Emirates on Somaliland as an independent state. So it is very much related to controlling the sea route. And when we think about this one, we should think about another non-regional actor, very much active in Africa, China. And Chinese One Belt, One Road initiative, the maritime route passes through this Suez Canal, and that's why recognition of Somaliland is very much related to this blocking the Chinese efforts, influence in the region. That's why America and Israel are at the same point in that manner. But when we think about Abraham Accords, it is an attempt to create a new status quo favoring Israeli national interests, which dates back to, which makes us to think about the trilateral agreement among Russian Federation, America, and Israel to remove Iranian proxy actors from Lebanon, from Syria, and in Iraq. And when we have Biden administration came into power, this trilateral agreement was no longer available, and we have the Israeli by herself try to accomplish this goal set during first Trump administration by herself via Abraham Accords, enlarging them. And remember, lately we have even a Central Asian country joining the Abraham Accords. Mm-hmm. It's very much related to Israeli aggressive, expansionist, influential policy to create a new status quo favoring India, Middle East, Europe corridor, IMEC, which is a kind of rival to Chinese One Belt, One Road initiative. So controlling some Somaliland territory instead of a Somalia, signing many Abraham Accords with many regional and non-regional countries are very much related to this overall goal of Israel.
It's going to be very interesting to see how this new diplomatic alignment is going to impact the region and try to solve the region's many issues. Ricardo, Filiz, I want to thank you both for joining me. We are out of time. Looking forward to having you on another show. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Yusuf Aram. If you got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find more exclusive content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.